All right, everyone. Welcome to the first webinar of 2020, Leveraging Your Identity in Entrepreneurship in Tech. If you could mute your microphone at the bottom of your screen, we're getting a little bit of background noise coming in. We're primarily going to use the chat feature at the bottom of the screen to communicate throughout the webinar. But appreciate you all being here. Appreciate your interest in Venture for America. We are recording this webinar. So if you missed something, we'll be sending the webinar recording out no later than tomorrow morning, but it's 4:31. So let's jump in. For those who are just joining, there's a chat feature at the bottom of the screen. Please introduce yourself. You'll see a bit of a template at the top of that thread. And we'll use the chat feature throughout the presentation, as well as speak to the points that you share throughout the chat introduction. And if you could check to make sure that your microphone is muted. I'm getting a little bit of feedback from somebody in the chain. All righty. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we are going to jump right in. Awesome. Well, appreciate you all being here. The title of this webinar is Leveraging Your Identity in Entrepreneurship in Tech. My name is Jacob Robinson. I'm a 2014 VFA alum. I now work on the talent team at Venture for America, and my colleague Joel is here as well. We're tag teaming this webinar today, and we're both going to introduce ourselves, tell you a little bit about ourselves. But for the sake of the recording in this webinar, it's January the 8th, 2020, and we're excited to be here with you all for the first webinar of the year. Before we introduce ourselves, want to give you a little bit of an overview of our objectives for today. So first of all, we want to share how Venture for America is helping fellows become both startup leaders and entrepreneurs. Secondly, we're going to explain that there are both general and identity-based barriers to starting a career in entrepreneurship in tech. But we want to encourage you that VFA is here to work with you as fellows to overcome these barriers, whether they're general, meaning they're for everybody, or they're specific to your identity, whether it's your gender, your race, your sexuality, your socioeconomic status. If you're a first-generation college student or from a certain region in the country, these are all different identities, and there are certain barriers related to those identities and many others. And lastly, we're going to explain how you can leverage your identity in entrepreneurship and tech. To tell you a little bit about myself, I'm from Columbus, Ohio. Went down to North Carolina for college. And when I was in high school and college, I was hustling as a DJ. That really was my first introduction to entrepreneurship. And so when I found out about Venture for America after my senior year, I applied. I'm thankful that I received an offer to join Venture for America fresh out of college, and I spent my fellowship in New Orleans. I worked at a startup in the food and beverage industry. I worked in a sales role. After my fellowship, I decided to stay in New Orleans. I worked at a second startup, continued working in sales. I wanted to return home to Columbus for a number of reasons, and when I did so, I wanted to take a step away from startups and explore the nonprofit scene. I studied public policy in college and wanted to find a way to explore that interest a little bit more. So joining the Venture for America team was a great intersection for my desire to give back while still being involved in entrepreneurship. And I still have the desire to work at startups. I still have the desire to start my own business. And I do have a couple of side projects that I'm working on right now. And this is an identity-based webinar. And so I think it's important to explain to you all where I'm coming from. So I identify as a man, I identify as cisgender, heterosexual, African American. I'm not a first generation college student and grew up in a middle class background. So just wanted to let you all know where I'm coming from, because there's going to be certain times during the webinar where I'm speaking from a position of privilege as well as a position of disadvantage. And I think each of us might have some of those feelings throughout this webinar. So just wanted to share my identity so you know where I'm coming from. How about you, Joel?
Yeah, of course. So thank you, Jacob, for the introduction. As he was saying, my name is Joel Vasquez, and similar to all of you, I am 5 weeks into Venture for America. So it's been an exciting time. Just to share a little bit about me, I'm originally from the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, and I attended the University of Maryland, College Park as a double major in American Studies and Government and Politics, and a double minor in Spanish and Public Leadership. And so, with that kind of in mind, though, diversity, equity, and inclusion work has always been, I think, a calling for me, just because it really interacts with the way that we face reality in the world, and especially the kinds of challenges that we really deal with. So, in that kind of sense, what really um, appealed to me about Venture for America was really sort of that breakdown and that introduction into the startup and entrepreneurship field, which Jacob and I will talk about soon. However, just of course to share my identities as well. So I am a second generation Filipino American within the LGBTQ community. And more specifically, like I also come from a middle class background, and I am cisgender as well. My pronouns are he, him, and his. So if any of you have any of questions later for the two of us, like please feel free. We definitely want this to be a conversation. However, aside from that, we're really grateful that you all are here, and we're excited to get started.
Awesome, Joel. Thanks for the introduction. And so let's jump right into a little bit about Venture for America and why we do the work that we do. So we believe that Venture for America, or excuse me, we believe that America needs more entrepreneurs. A big reason why we feel this way is because entrepreneurship is on the decline in the United States. A big reason why entrepreneurship is on the decline is because there are a lot of barriers to becoming an entrepreneur, and there really aren't many incentives as well. And so I'm curious, could you all share via the chat feature, what are some barriers that you personally face to starting your career in entrepreneurship? David jumped in and said, capital. You got to have money to start a business. It seems Clarkey said there's a network gap. You know, some of us have the relationships to start a business. Some of us don't have those connections yet. Dan, the risk of nothing to fall back on. Finding founders with the same interests, experience, networking, capital, lack of money, and misinformation. Many people doubt the idea of becoming an entrepreneur. It's risky. Geography, having a market, experience, programming skills. Excuse me. These are all great answers, and they're very similar to some of the slides that I have coming up here. So a lot of you are in college or right out of college, and you might be tackling some debt, right? It's scary to want to start your own business and be financially insecure or risky. And when you have bills, whether it's debt or some other type of bill. What about training, right? There's not like a 101 to become an entrepreneur. It takes some experience. Also, on TV, there's a narrative that becoming an entrepreneur is always, along an upward trajectory. But when reality, it's more like a roller coaster. At Venture for America, we envision a country where anyone who wants to become an entrepreneur can be one. And so our mission is to create economic opportunity in American cities by mobilizing the next generation of entrepreneurs and equipping them with the skills and resources they need to create jobs. If you are applying to Venture for America, if you're interested in applying to Venture for America, here's your first tip. Read our mission and really pick it apart. Think about the parts that resonate with you the most. Think about the parts that get you really excited. And when you apply to Venture for America, speak to why Venture for America is the next best step in your career and speak to our mission, right? We're a nonprofit. Nonprofits are fired up about their missions. That's your tip for one of your tips for today for applying to Venture for America. And so we go about this mission through a 2-year entrepreneurship fellowship for recent grads who want to learn to build businesses, create opportunities, and become entrepreneurs. And so there are 2 outcomes in Venture for America. One is becoming a startup leader, and one is becoming a founder. And this graphic here will tell you a little bit about how you go about getting to those 2 outcomes. So between your senior year and up to 3 years after graduation, you can apply to Venture for America. In April, in the year after that you join Venture for America, a portal opens up. That portal's called Match, and that's where you find your job. Think of Match as like a private LinkedIn just for incoming VFA fellows, where there's more job opportunities than there are fellows. And we work with you to help you find the right fit and not a quick fit, because we want you to spend some time there over the next 2 years and learn. And so before you go to that job in one of our 14 cities, you'll attend training camp. And training camp is our best attempt for that entrepreneurship training, right? That entrepreneurship 101. It's also a great opportunity to get to know the other fellows in your class. So there will be about 200 fellows in the class of 2020, and that'll be the first time that you'll get to see them all in person and get to know them. As a fellow, training camp and the relationships that I developed at training camp were hands down some of the highlights of my experience. And so in August, September of the year after you become a fellow, you will move to one of our 14 cities, the city where you got a job during Match, and you'll begin working as a startup employee. Yes, you are a Venture for America fellow, but you are an employee of the startup that you work at first. This is the core of the fellowship: learning on the job, learning to master your skill set, learning to lead a team, to lead a project, as well as a recent grad, learning to be a professional within a startup context. At the end of those 2 years, we're going to survey you, and we're going to ask you, do you identify as a leader at that startup, right? Not everybody on this webinar or as VFA fellows wants to start a business or is ready to start a business, but we want to train you to become a leader at the startup that you work at, right? That could be leading a team, managing others, leading projects. Perhaps you've mastered your skill set, or you're mastering your skill set like I was a salesperson. So there's a lot of different ways to cut being a startup leader. And at any time during or after the fellowship, we have resources that you can take advantage of to become a founder. And so that might be the day after the fellowship, or it might be 10 years after the fellowship. But the point is, if you want to start a business, we've helped dozens of fellows start businesses since 2012, and we've got the resources to help you. And so if you're applying to Venture for America, second tip, speak to why you want to become a leader at a startup and or a founder, because those are the only 2 outcomes that our program produces. So if you can speak to either or both of those outcomes, you're in the right place. There's 14 cities that we work in. You'll notice that these cities are predominantly in the Midwest, the Northeast, and the Southeast. We picked these 14 cities because they have a couple of things in common. One, they have growing entrepreneurial ecosystems. What does that mean? That means that there are startups, businesses in these communities that are making noise, that are closing deals, that are growing, hiring people, and solving real problems. A lot of these startups, something that they have in common is they struggle to recruit people like you and me to work for them, right? If we think startups, we think San Francisco, New York City, maybe Austin, Boston, DC, right? We don't think about Cleveland, Ohio, Miami, San Antonio, St. Louis, or Detroit. But there are real companies solving real problems and growing in these cities. And the value proposition is we know that you can move to one of these big cities. We know that you can get perhaps a six-figure salary at a startup or a tech company. But by going to these smaller ponds, if you will, there's an opportunity to become a bigger fish sooner than if you're in, let's just call it the ocean of San Francisco, San Francisco's tech scene. So there's not one or right or wrong answer. It's just a different opportunity to get to your career goals. And so I want to give you a quick overview on where VFA has been and where we're going. We have helped over 1,000 fellows launch their entrepreneurial careers. The class of 2020 will bring us to about 1,200 fellows all time. These fellows have come from over 150 schools. It's very important for us to recruit across the country and to give anybody who wants to become an entrepreneur a chance to become a startup leader or an entrepreneur. These fellows have worked at nearly 500 companies, startups throughout our 14 cities. We started with 5 cities in 2012, and we now operate in 14 cities. To date, about 1 in 3 VFA alumni have started a company with VFA. Some of these fellows are working on their businesses still and are growing them. I highly encourage you to look at our fellow founded companies on our website, and we're going to be talking about some of those fellow founded companies later who are leveraging their identity in their business. Some of them have wound their companies down because, as you and I both know, with startups, sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But it's about learning and having a growth mindset and continuing to move forward. Lastly, I talked about how startup leadership is one of our programmatic outcomes at Venture for America. About 6 in 10 VFA fellows identify as leaders at the company that they work at. So we can both improve in terms of the number of fellows who are starting businesses, as well as the number of fellows who are alumni who identify as leaders. But those are the 2 outcomes that we are working towards now. And, we have room to grow. And so another opportunity for crowd participation, when we say entrepreneurs, who comes to mind? So what are the entrepreneurs' names? And feel free to use the chat to share. We've got Elon Musk, Richard Branson, Steve Jobs, Mike Dell, Andrew Yang, of course. We got Musk and Jack Ma. This is a good list. Lovey, Oprah, love Oprah. Not quite sure who Lovey is. Who's that, Clarky? All right, well, my point with this slide is if we think about the names that come to mind, the vast majority of this list likely identifies as male, white, and not Latinx. Thanks for the clarification there, Clark. Got to look her up. And I bring this up. We got Rihanna in here. I love it. I bring this up because at Venture for America, we seek to change the face of entrepreneurship. You all listed some of these entrepreneurs that come to mind that are on the screen. And to tell you a little bit about these entrepreneurs that are in front of you, Jeff Bezos went to Princeton and worked on Wall Street. Mark Zuckerberg is a Harvard dropout. Mark Cuban came from humbler beginnings, but is also a straight white male. And this is, as a disclaimer, this is no shot at anybody who identifies as straight or as male or as white. We at Venture for America hope that 10, 20 years from now, that when we say entrepreneur, there are a lot of women that come to mind. There are a lot of racial and ethnic minorities that come to mind, and members of the LGBT community that come to mind. That list is not exclusive. We hope that there's first-generation college students and folks from working class and low-income backgrounds. The point is we want anyone who wants to become an entrepreneur as a recent grad to become an entrepreneur. And so to demonstrate some of the identity-based barriers that are facing you all in terms of becoming an entrepreneur, right? We spoke about the general barriers. I want to dig a little bit into identity and then talk about what Venture for America is doing about it. So one of our outcomes, once again, is startup leadership. And the example here that I'm going to use is race and ethnicity. And so here's a graphic from Brookings. In 2018, the US population in terms of race and ethnicity was approximately 60% identifying as white, 18% identifying as Hispanic Latinx, 12% identifying as Black, and 5% identifying as Asian. And I know that those are very broad categories, and there's a lot of people within and outside of those groups as well. But those are the 4 broad categories that I'm going to use right now. And in comparison, this is the racial diversity of Silicon Valley in 2018. And so you'll see here that generally speaking, these companies identify at about 40 to 55% white, about 15 to 40% Asian. And the numbers are quite smaller for Latinx and Black in comparative to the numbers that we saw in the previous slide. A couple of disclaimers. So you'll see that Amazon and Apple, they're actually fairly diverse in terms of the number of people who identify as Black and Latinx. Those numbers are a little bit more inflated because they have retail and warehouse employees included in these numbers. And so my point with this slide is that when it comes to Silicon Valley, people who identify as Black and Latinx are underrepresented. The reason why this is important in terms of startup leadership is that one, if you're not in the room, it's hard to become a startup leader. But 2, if you are in the room, it might be difficult to become a leader at a company if there aren't people who look like you or identify like you or from your background at your company. Those people that might be ahead of you could serve as mentors, could serve as role models, could open the door on your behalf. And so the point is, if somebody wants to become a leader at a startup, specifically those who identify as Black and Latinx, there's a barrier in front of them to achieve that goal. And so, like I said, we're looking to change the face of entrepreneurship, and we're working to become an on-ramp to entrepreneurship for racial and ethnic minorities. And so you'll see in the left column, we have racial and ethnic groups. In the second column, we have the US population that I shared on the previous slides. And then we've got the class of 2019, which would be the class that just entered into Venture for America. And so, as you can see, we've got some room to grow, and we're doing all right in some areas as well. In terms of those who identify as white and non-Hispanic, there's a 6% negative difference there. For those who identify as Hispanic Latinx, there's a 7% negative difference there. For those who identify as Black, there's a 1% positive difference, Asian 12% positive difference, and Native American 0.5% positive difference. So as I said, room to grow. This is something that we are aware of. And in comparative to Silicon Valley, we're actually beating Silicon Valley in terms of those racial and ethnic diversity of the community there versus Venture for America. And so the last example that I'm going to give is in terms of founders, right? The second outcome that we support is becoming an entrepreneur. And so to demonstrate this example, I am going to focus on gender here. And so this is a graph of the total value of venture capital deals by gender. And so we have 3 different shades of blue here. And this is measured in terms of billions of dollars. The darkest shade of blue is for teams that are all male founders. The shade of blue that's a little bit lighter, it might be teal for on your screen, is if there's at least 1 female founder on the team. And the light blue, also the smallest graph there, is for an all-female team. So as you can see, groups that are all male or majority male, hugely outweigh the amount of or have received a way more venture capital funding over the years than groups that are all female. And so to really demonstrate this point, according to PitchBook and All Raise in 2018, Juul, the electronic cigarette company, raised $12.8 billion in venture capital funding. That same year, US female-founded companies received $2.88 billion in venture capital funding. So Juul, the company itself, raised $10 billion more than all the US female-founded companies combined. This was a total of about 480 female-founded companies, and they received about 2% of the $130 billion in venture capital invested. The reason why I make this point is we're talking about barriers to entrepreneurship. If there's a person that identifies as a woman or gender nonconforming, it's hard to become an entrepreneur if you don't have the capital. Some folks shared that there's capital as a barrier to them getting into entrepreneurship regardless of gender. But we know that if a person identifies as a woman or gender nonconforming, it's even harder. And so we want to be a part of that change. And to let you know a little bit about what we're doing about that, we're working to become an on-ramp to entrepreneurship for people who identify as women and gender nonconforming. So one of the things that we're most proud of as a company is that in 2018, we had our first majority female identifying class. Last year, it shifted back to being a male majority class, and we know a couple of reasons about why that is, and we've worked to resolve them for the class of 2020. But our point is, we feel like we are at a special place to help recent grads, regardless of their race, their gender, their sexuality, their socioeconomic status, to get into entrepreneurship right out of school, to get that experience and to have the resources and support of the Venture for America, so that we can work with you early in your career to overcome those barriers and achieve your goal as a startup leader or a founder. And the last little point here is that we're working with fellows to overcome these identity-based barriers, right? We can't do it for you. We can have these values. We can work to support you, but we cannot do it for you. And so this is something that is hard, but with all the barriers that we've listed, from the general ones to the identity-based ones, these are barriers that you're going to have to overcome on your own with our support. And so I want to talk a little bit about what we do at Venture for America to support people of all backgrounds. First, when applying to Venture for America, we want to recruit a robust and diverse applicant pool. We recruit at identity-based colleges like HBCUs, HSIs, and women's colleges. In terms of our selection model, right? That's how we, read and assess your application. We have designed and execute this model so it doesn't replicate inequities in society. We also train our interviewers in terms of unconscious bias so that they can check their bias at the door when reading your application and interviewing you. I talked about Match, the period where you find your job. We have Match coaches that help fellows who need interview prep as well as resume prep. I serve as one of those coaches, and it's one of my favorite parts of my job. We also look for founders that identify as women, who identify as people of color and racial and ethnic minorities. So perhaps you could work for a company where somebody's there who identifies like you identify. When it comes to training camp, there's opportunities to engage in the Detroit community. For example, a website challenge where you help small businesses that are founded by women and racial and ethnic minorities. We also have a workshop that's called, how to move to your city and not be an asshole. And pardon my French, but the idea here is, we come from all over the country, and we're going to come to Detroit or New Orleans or Cleveland or Miami as an outsider. How do we move to those cities and be a citizen and involved member of the startup community and make an impact? When it comes to our programs, we have VFA Rise, there are 7 RISE groups. These are identity-based employee resource groups that are started and run by fellows. A couple that I'd like to highlight are some of my favorites. So Venture Out is for our fellows who identify with the LGBT community. We've got VF Asians. I think that's one of the most creative names of the bunch, for fellows who identify as Asian. We also have Build 21 for fellows who identify as Black and African American. And those are just 3 of the 4 fellow employee resource groups that we have. They're called VFA Rise. And lastly, when it comes to becoming a startup leader and a founder, we have Operation 3 to 300, and VFA has teamed up with UBS and Uber to help 300 fellows become entrepreneurs by 2021. And so you might be one of those, and we are here to help. Like I said, this journey is hard. It's hard regardless of your identity. And we believe that you can overcome those barriers, and we're here to work with you. But understand that although VFA might be the community inside this bubble, we're still operating in the real world. And so some of those barriers you still might face regardless of your identity, but we're here to help. And so I want to highlight a couple of fellows who are leveraging their identity and entrepreneurship in tech. This is one of my favorite parts of the webinar, to highlight some of my peers who are doing the business. And I'll start with Yalitza Jean Charles. She's in the class of 2016. She spent her fellowship in Cincinnati. She launched a company called Healthy Roots, which is a doll that teaches women of color to love and care for her hair. So growing up, she couldn't find a lot of dolls that looked like her, that had the hair that she has. So she launched Healthy Roots to help young women learn to not only love their hair, but care for their hair. I'm very proud of the gentleman in the orange. His name is Sean Wynn. He's in the class of 2014, which is my class. Sean went to the University of Texas at Austin, became an investment banker, and worked at an investment firm for 2 years. Him and his buddy to the right had talked about becoming restaurateurs since high school. They grew up in the Houston area, and if you know anything about the Houston area, there's some really cool like Asian Cajun fusion going on down there. Cajun cuisine is very popular throughout that region, but there's large Asian populations that have mixed their cuisine down in that area. So Sean spent his fellowship in Baltimore. As a VFA alum, he moved back to Texas and moved to San Antonio, another VFA city, and they launched Pinch Boil House and Bia Bar. If you're ever in Austin or San Antonio, you have to go. I spent my fellowship in New Orleans, and I ate a whole bunch of crawfish, but I think their crawfish is the best I've ever had. Don't tell anybody in New Orleans, but they are growing. They're quickly going to expand and are considering expansion to Austin. And so based on their upbringing, Sean launched a business with Venture for America in his home state. And the last fellow-founded company I'm going to highlight is Ash and Erie. I really like this one because I know we've spoken about race in this webinar, ethnicity, gender, but I think the company Ash and Erie really demonstrates how a person can leverage their identity to start a business. So Eric and Steven are Detroit fellows from the class of 2013. They launched Ash and Erie to provide clothing for shorter guys. They were tired of buying t-shirts and sweatshirts and hoodies that came down to their knees. And so I forget the exact height that they work with, but I believe it's around the 5'5", 5'6" range. They're growing their company in Detroit, hiring people, hiring other VFA fellows. And it just shows that if you are facing a problem, whether you're Yalitza in terms of your upbringing and your hair, Ash and Erie with your clothing, or having a certain cuisine that you grew up eating or that represents your background, there's an opportunity to start a business, and you can do so with VFA. And so in closing, I just want to challenge you all to think about how you can leverage your identity to become a startup leader or a founder And Bowsley here, apologize if that's not your name, it might be an abbreviation, said that it's Asheniri is for guys who identify as 5'7" and below. So thanks for that confirmation, and thanks for doing your research. And so if you are thinking about applying to Venture for America, we have one deadline remaining for the class of 2020. That deadline is January the 31st. If you're interested, if you want to stay in touch, reach out to me and or Joel. We'd be happy to help you. The application has 4 steps. The first step will take you about an hour to 2 hours if you're a perfectionist like me. We collect some basic, information from you, contact information, and like a little bit of like snippets from your resume. In step 2, there's 2 essays. I'll tell you how you can prepare for those essays shortly. And step 3, you will have a video interview. The final step of the application is selection day. For the purposes of deadline 4, that will take place in St. Louis or New York City. You can attend the selection day that works for your schedule or your budget. To prepare for the VFA application, tip number 3, there are 2 essential questions for the entire Venture for America application. If you focus on these 2 tips, you will be prepared. We cut up the application in a bunch of different ways, but here are the 2 different VFA questions. 1, why is VFA the next best step in your career? If you're not writing these down, you should. Why is VFA the next best step in your career? This could have something to do with your career goals, our mission, the outcomes that we support. Tell your story when you answer this question. Number 2, how do your experiences translate to skills that are valuable at a startup? Right? Whether you're a cashier at the campus store, you have work-study experience, you've interned at a startup, you've led a club, started a community initiative, or started a business, right? You've had a bunch of experiences. Please be confident in your experiences and be as fired up when you're applying to Venture for America about your experiences as I am in this webinar. And you need to think about what are valuable skills at a startup. Perhaps you want to be a salesperson or an engineer or work in operations. Think about how those experiences translate to the skills in terms of the roles that you're interested in working in at a startup, right? If you think about those 2 questions, basically what we're asking are you a good fit for our community, Venture for America? And number 2, can you get a job in Match? Right? Those are the 2 things that deep down we're assessing for throughout the application process. If you spend some time reflecting on those 2 questions, you will be prepared to put your best foot forward. Here's our contact information. I'm going to leave it up. You could reach out to Joel, me and or Joel. We both recruit, all fellows. Both of us do focus on diversity and inclusion on the recruitment team. I tend to work to support, candidates who identify as underrepresented racial and ethnic minorities. Joel tends to work to support candidates who identify as women and gender nonconforming. If you do not fall into either of those backgrounds, Joel and I are still here to help you, I promise. Those are just groups that we want to make sure have support and encouragement throughout this process for many of the reasons that we've shared in this webinar. And so appreciate you all being here today. It is 5:09, which means we have 21 minutes for questions. If you could start threading your questions in the chat channel, I know that there might be quite a few, and so I might try to answer them in groups, but feel free to thread them, and I'll get to them in order of category. All right, the first one here. What kind of commitment are students signing once they are committed? This is when you sign for Venture for America, you're really signing based on your word, right? We can't force you to join Venture for America. We can't force you to work at the companies that are on Match, but you're signing that you're committing to work at the company or working with Venture for America to find a job and committing to the 2-year fellowship. Are there fellows who do not complete the fellowship for a variety of reasons? Yes, but you're giving us your word that you want to sign on to be a Venture for America fellow, be an active member of our community, and work at one of the company partners that you get hired by. And so it's not a binding agreement in any way. We can't force you to be a VFA fellow, but you're giving us your word. Does VFA help with housing? Yes and no. So for context, you are a VFA fellow, but we do not pay you. The startup that you work at and that hires you will pay you every 2 weeks, as well as provide your health benefits. So we do not get involved with housing. However, fellows do tend to live together. Fellows tend to organize that at training camp, and older fellows will like help you look for housing because you'll be in Detroit, figuring out the final touches on your job placement, and getting ready to move in like August or September. And so that's a fellow-led activity, and it's part of the experience of living with fellows. Talking about startup, your experience on the job when you come home from work, both ups and downs. What kinds of things stand out in the essays? Being able to answer those 2 questions that I shared, as well as telling your story throughout this application process. Don't tell us what you think we want to hear. Tell us your story. What has been your greatest community moment with VFA? It's definitely training camp. I don't know if you've ever been like a part of a community that inspires you to do better. But every time I'm with my VFA community, whether it's at training camp or a reunion or just getting together with some friends, or even selection day when I'm hanging out with you all, I'm inspired to be my best self and to continue on my journey as a leader and a founder. Joel, how about you? What's your greatest community moment thus far in these first 5 weeks?
Oh my goodness. No, I want to say in these last 5 weeks, probably one of the greatest community moments that I've really witnessed has really been at a pitch competition. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, at these pitch competitions, different organizations and companies that our fellows created essentially really voice their experience and the story behind their organization in order to compete for different cash prizes to really help fund their organizations. And just in kind of witnessing like everyone come together and really the camaraderie behind everyone supporting one another and really their goals and dreams, like that at the end of the day is something that in and of itself is really challenging and difficult to find. However, like in those moments when it is there, like it really is special and it really means something, I think, significant in that way.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Joel. And the pitch competition is a part of the fellow founded resources that are available to you, during your fellowship as well as after your fellowship. So Jordan asked, what are the industry subsectors covered by the Startup Partner Network affiliated with VFA? So if you go to the Venture for America website, you can go to where we work and you can see all the startups where fellows have worked in the past. To answer your question, Jordan, the vast majority of our companies are in like the technology space, but we also, and I know that's very broad, but we also have companies in healthcare, education, advertising, e-commerce, venture capital, real estate, finance, the Internet of Things, health and wellness. And so quite a lot of industries. The best place to really really dig into like a sample is the VFA website. What was the most exciting point for you during your time at VFA? The most exciting point for me was seeing my company grow. I saw my company grow from 40 employees to over 100 employees, from operating in 10 cities to over 30 cities. And when you're a part of that type of growth, you learn a ton. You learn to prioritize. Um, you learn mental health and wellness because you're working a ton. You're thrown opportunities for leadership when you're like younger and like inexperienced because they need bodies to execute tasks. And so like the people that I went through that experience with down in New Orleans, like I think of them as family. And that was like such a crazy and busy time in my life, but I would definitely describe it as exciting. And there were definitely some like low points from that experience as well, and I can definitely share those. I'm not just gonna like sell you on like the good, but also the the bad and the ugly. So, but that was the most exciting time during my fellowship. Um, Matt asked, are there any opportunities at VFA prior to graduation? So you can be an intern for Venture for America at our training camp, and that's like a great look at like VFA as an organization. Um, while that is like a great look at VFA as an organization, if you want to become a startup leader and or a founder, my advice to you as an underclassman would be to intern at a startup and or start something. To kind of give you a little bit more advice about that, like I'm the self-declared king of extracurricular activities. I was always like running to like club meetings and like off-campus commitments. And if I really like look back at that time, I wish I wouldn't have been so busy. One, so that I could hang out with my friends more, because that's what you really miss about college. But two, during the semester is a great opportunity to intern at a startup, right? You can intern virtually, you can intern in person. Your housing is covered during the semester, right? Your food is covered during the semester. Why not find a startup and say like, hey, can I work at your startup 1 or 2 days a week, X amount of hours per week? If you think about your summers, right, you get 3 summers in between college, but you have 8 semesters. So there's like 11 opportunities to get some like work experience there. Especially as an upperclassman, I'd recommend kind of shifting from like on-campus activities to more professional experiences, because the more professional opportunities you have, the more you can kind of figure out what you don't want to do as well as what you do want to do. If you are thinking about internships during the summer, I'm never a proponent of free internships. I don't think that's fair, but that is a route to go. Another route to go is to intern at a startup in a place where you have housing or food covered. So you could, stay on someone's couch, find a startup in your hometown, and like live at your house or with family. The entrepreneurial journey is about hustling. And so sometimes you got to get your hands a little dirty. And so any way that you can get startup experience, I recommend it. Even if you can't intern at a startup, try to start something, right? Whether it's a club or a community initiative, or a business, right? You can figure out if this route is for you by interning at a startup or starting something. And even if you're not ready to start a business, getting in the habit of starting something, the fundamentals are the same, right? You got to identify a problem, recruit people to sign up for your crazy idea, whether they're clients or participants or team members. Set a plan and pursue that plan, accomplish objectives and key results. So we don't just like look for people who can code, who have started a business and have interned at startups their entire life. We look for people who want to become startup leaders, who want to become founders, and can really translate their past experiences into one of those two outcomes, if not both. So a couple of opportunities there for you, Matt. If you're looking for a way to like network your way into startups, check out the 20-minute networking meeting, the graduate edition. This is like my favorite business book of all time that teaches you how to network. Everybody on this call can benefit from that book, both in terms of networking for VFA before and after the fellowship. What are some good ways to figure out my ideal roles in a company? Great question. So I'd recommend like looking at VFA fellows and like on LinkedIn or on the VFA website, and like clicking through their profiles, finding like seeing like what their roles were, right? So like I was always in business development and sales, and then like maybe look at their backgrounds, and see like activities that they were a part of. Another way to think about this is look at like job descriptions generally on any website, but especially startup websites. You could even look at like the startups that we work with and look at the job descriptions, right? Generally speaking, like there's technical and non-technical, right? So if it's technical, you either have those skills or you don't. If it's non-technical, there's usually internal roles and external roles. So external roles are usually like people facing. If you're an extrovert, if you talk really fast like me, if you like being on webinars and talking to people, you might like being in a people facing role, whether it's like recruitment or sales, business development, account management. If you might, there's definitely introverts in those roles as well, but I'm just kind of painting a big picture. If you're really organized, right, operations is great for you. If you're a communicator, right, content creation and marketing, great roles for you. I hope that helps, but just do your research, whether it's VFA profiles, job descriptions, or really like reflecting about your own experience. Sadie asked about editing their application. Email me and I'll help you with that. I'm glad that this webinar has inspired you to edit your application. I'm sure it was a great application anyway. Advice on standing out, but not too much on selection day. Be a great teammate and prepare for those 2 questions that I shared with you. Selection day is group activities in the morning, an individual interview in the afternoon. Everybody who makes it to selection day, we believe, can be a fellow. People who stand out are phenomenal teammates that demonstrate their strengths and can speak to those 2 questions in the afternoon. Blair, I see your question about being a first-year student. I love that you are out here. Snaps for Blair for getting involved with career activities as a first-year student. I hope that my advice earlier to Matt helps you think about if you want to become a leader at a startup and or a founder, and if so, VFA is a great step for you. Is it appropriate to connect with current employees at any startups you're interested in interviewing at during the application process? I don't think it's appropriate for a couple of reasons. One, those companies may not be hiring this year for a number of reasons. The startups that are on our website are fellows that have hired VFA fellows in the past. There's a number of reasons why they may or may not be hiring. If you want to connect with an employee at a startup while you're in the VFA application process, I recommend you reach out to fellows. That's a great tip. Reach out to people who are peer to identify like you identify, who went to your school or from a place where you're from. If nobody has gone to your school, pick a school that you've never heard of on the VFA website. Likely it's only like 1 or 2 people who have come from that school, and talk to them about how they were like the first fellow from their school and trailblaze that path. I wouldn't recommend reaching out to employees, but speaking to fellows briefly about their experience is a great way to learn about VFA and that company. That book, the 20-minute networking meeting graduate edition, will teach you how to have a 20-minute conversation with a VFA fellow and get what you need out of that conversation. Highly recommend it. Best $10 you will ever spend. Do fellows ever bring significant others with them when they move to their city? Absolutely. So, think of VFA as like a community that's going to help you get a job and support you on your journey. Besides that, like, you can handle this experience any way that you want. You do not have to live with fellows. Fellows live with each other because it's affordable, for the camaraderie. And it's because it's like somewhat a part of the experience. Sometimes that's with a significant other or a friend who's living in that city. Sometimes you're on your own. So you can handle that situation however you want. And when preferencing cities for Venture for America, if you have like a significant other that you need to live with that is working in a specific city, or you want to live in a specific city because your family's there and you need to help out, those are all valid reasons to preference a city. Is there currently, or will there be in the future, a cyclical relationship between VFA and alumni founded businesses? Meaning, would businesses started by VFA alum ever be considered for businesses in the match program to benefit from VFA fellows? Absolutely. That's actually already happening. Companies like Bonza and Natural Club So, Felix Gray, some of our well-known fellow-founded companies, they're hiring younger VFA fellows to work for them. I've looked at jobs when I was in New Orleans at fellow-founded companies, and I think it's really amazing. What were some struggles you faced during VFA, and how did you overcome them? The struggle that I think the most about during my fellowship really is about mental health. I think that for a person who wants to become a leader in a startup environment and or a founder, mental health is essential. I say that because we talked about the barriers, right? It's lonely. There's not a lot of training or support. It's really hard, right? It's a roller coaster. It's not like just going straight up the mountain. The hours are long. It's unstructured. For a young person to be starting their career in an entrepreneurial environment, like those are all really hard things to do. And so, how for me, like working really hard, living in New Orleans, participating in the extracurricular activities that New Orleans is known for, being far away from family, not having a lot of people from my college that moved to New Orleans with me. I think some ways that like VFA helped with all of that, like I wasn't alone. There were 20 other fellows who moved to New Orleans with me, and we were very open about our ups and downs. I really like learned to focus on like work-life balance and why working out, eating right, eating healthy, not putting substances in my body, participating in my faith, staying in touch with friends and family, traveling to get out of New Orleans, getting extracurricular activities outside of the startup and entrepreneurship scene. It was definitely like a journey for me to like really be like an owner of my mental health. Going to a psychologist. Like I don't understand why we like check our teeth once or twice a year. We go to the doctor once or twice a year, but we don't check our mind once or twice a year. So going to like a psychologist was like one of the best things that I've ever done, and I still do it today. And so like my point is anybody who wants to become a leader at a startup and or a founder has to be a master of their mental health, or I highly doubt they will last. This is something that VFA takes very seriously as an organization and as a community. And so that's like a struggle that I faced and overcame during my fellowship. And it's something that I think about every single day about like, how can I be physically healthy, emotionally healthy, spiritually healthy, but also mentally healthy. Peyton asked, when does training camp start? July. I believe the 4th of July is like a Saturday. Training camp starts on that Sunday, the 5th. Yeah, Jeremy, putting the 20-minute networking meeting graduate edition in there. I love it. When you guys buy that book and read it, send me an email. If you get accepted, do we get to meet Andrew Yang? No. So because Andrew Yang is a political official, he is our founder and he was our CEO for a period of time. We are a nonprofit, and so we're not allowed to interact or establish political beliefs with people who are running for office. We could lose our status as a nonprofit. So Andrew Yang is no longer associated with VFA as the CEO. He stepped down, and Amy Nelson is our CEO. She's a huge reason why I work at Venture for America. I believe in her mission and I believe in her leadership. And so unfortunately, you do not get to meet Andrew Yang as a part of joining Venture for America. Good question though. Are the city preferences chosen during the application process necessarily given priority? I'm having some second guesses about my choices and don't want to have unwittingly blocked an opportunity. Don't worry about that. You can provide additional context later in the application process. I mean, you don't know that much about these cities now, and you'll learn more throughout the application process. So, and you'll be able to explain the reasoning behind your preferences. It is 5:29. I want to respect your time, but I do see that there's a couple more questions. I'm willing to answer Tien's question as well as Jeremy's statement here, but I do want to respect everybody's time, so feel free to jump off at 5:30. Joel and I appreciate you all coming to this webinar, your interest in Venture for America, whether it's a class of 2020 or a future deadline. So thank you for being here, and let us know if we can be of help. Tien asked, what are the curriculums during the summer boot camp? Yeah, great question. So we have like soft skill training and we have hard skill training. The expectation is that we're going to introduce you to a little bit about a lot, so that on day one of working at a startup, if your founder says, hey, I need you to go do this, like you've heard about that before and you can Google your way through it. Believe it or not, a lot of entrepreneurs and startup leaders Google their way through problems. And so what's an example of soft skill training? So there's a concept that we talk about at Venture for America called managing up. Managing up is the idea of, how can I manage my manager so they can manage me, right? In general, throughout the country and the world, people are poor managers, right? They don't have time for it. Nobody trains us to be managers. So given that people's time in their is very occupied at a startup and it's very busy, how can you manage your manager so that they can manage you? And so we talk about strategies for managing up. What is an example of a hard skill training? Excel and Google Sheets are great tools for working at a startup, especially because people really want to make data informed decisions. And so navigating your way around a spreadsheet is very important. This is a great opportunity to describe how there's certain tracks during training camp. So there's like an introductory Excel course, and then there's an advanced Excel course. There's not really an in between. Like if you're an Excel expert, right, you're in a data class or a data major, you've worked in finance or accounting, right, you're probably on the advanced side. Everybody else should be in beginner, frankly. And so you can split into like either of those classes and take advantage of that education over like a 2-3 day period. Dry, but very important, and will help you in your role. I'm actually taking an Excel class right now. Well, Jeremy, happy to fight the stigma against mental health. Always appreciate all of you saying thank you here. We are really excited that you all are interested in Venture for America, and we are here for you. So feel free to reach out to any of me and or Joel to support you throughout this application process. We will be sending a recording out no later than tomorrow morning. If you missed anything, Tien, I don't have a list of the types of classes at training camp, but you might be able to find that on the VFA website. Send me an email and I'll try to find a link for you. Awesome. Well, it's 5:32. It's dinner time. It's getting dark outside. Appreciate y'all's interest in VFA, and talk to you soon.